Monsieur le doyen de corps diplomatique, Monseigneur Mauricio Rueda Belts, Excellences, Messieurs les ambassadeurs et les chefs de mission diplomatiques, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, Excellence Faustin Inzigou, ambassadeur gabonais, qui est aussi le doyen du corps diplomatique pour les ambassadeurs africains, Mesdames et Messieurs les administrateurs de la Banque africaine de développement et votre banque ici en Côte d'Ivoire avec le siège est représentée ici par M. Watu Boumna, il prononcé ça bien, j'espère. Ouattara, mais ça on connaît hein, le nom Ouattara. Ministre délégué du ministère des Affaires étrangères et de l'intégration africaine et ivoirien et de l'extérieur. Mesdames et Messieurs les membres de la haute direction, conseillers des administrateurs, les membres du personnel de la Banque africaine de développement, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des médias, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est un grand plaisir et un honneur pour moi, en tant que président de la groupe de la Banque africaine de développement, de vous accueillir tous. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs les ambassadeurs, chefs de mission diplomatiques et représentants d'organisations internationales à ce déjeuner annuel. Cela fait si longtemps que nous n'avons pas organisé ce déjeuner. Il faisait partie du calendrier régulier du groupe de la Banque africaine de développement, car il me donne l'occasion, en tant que président de la Banque, de vous présenter, en tant que représentant de nos actionnaires et partenaires, le travail et le progrès accomplis par la Banque, et d'examiner la façon dont nous pouvons travailler ensemble pour améliorer nos partenariats stratégiques. Mais le monde a changé en 2020 avec la pandémie de COVID-19 qui nous a empêchés de nous réunir physiquement. Les mondes de travail ont également changé et les institutions ont adopté un modèle de travail hybride. Heureusement, grâce au succès des efforts déployés à l'échelle mondiale pour lutter contre la pandémie, la situation a largement évolué et est revenue à la normale. C'est pourquoi j'apprécie énormément cette occasion qui nous est donnée de nous retrouver. Et bien évidemment, nous nous retrouvons juste après la victoire de la Côte d'Ivoire, notre pays hôte à la Coupe d'Afrique des Nations. J'espère que vous allez applaudir pour ça. Comme vous le savez, la Côte d'Ivoire a joué la finale contre mon pays, le Nigeria. Et dès que je suis arrivé au stade, on était dans la salle avec son Excellence, M. Ouattara, M. le Président de la République. J'ai porté les t-shirts bleus. Le Président m'avait regardé, Akin, tu n'as pas porté le t-shirt soit vert ou bien orange. Il dit, Excellence, Monsieur le Président, je suis le président de la Banque africaine de développement. Je suis comme une trésorerie pour tous les pays. Donc, je suis venu avec les casquettes bleues. Donc, j'étais là avec mon grand frère, son Excellence Président Ouattara, pour regarder la marche ensemble avec les autres dignitaires. Je tiens à féliciter le président Alassane Ouattara et tout le peuple de Côte d'Ivoire pour cette victoire et pour l'excellente organisation de cet événement qui, des avis généraux, est la meilleure phase finale de la Coupe d'Afrique des Nations depuis sa création. Je dois vous dire quelque chose parce que je sais qu'il y avait beaucoup de monde qui voulait avoir les jours fériés pour pouvoir amener la coupe partout, on fait le tour du pays. Mais il y a quelque chose à vous dire parce que dans mon discussion avec mon grand frère, Monsieur le Président, je lui avais posé la question. Il avait dit, Excellence, Monsieur le Président, quand vous étiez Premier ministre, j'étais économiste principal à l'époque à l'ADRAO, Organisation pour la production de riz en Afrique, ouest africain, qui était basée à Bouaké. C'était 1992. La Côte d'Ivoire a remporté la Coupe d'Afrique des Nations. Et à l'époque, le président de la République était le président Houphouët-Boigny. Le président Houphouët-Boigny avait dit, on fera 7 jours fériés. Après la coupe, on fait la tour dans tout le pays. Et le jeune, bon, je peux dire jeune à l'époque, Alassane Ouattara, Premier ministre, mon grand frère, il avait dit sur la télévision, non, Monsieur le Président, avec tout mes respects, on fait 2 jours, parce qu'il avait calculé l'impact sur l'économie. Donc, c'était 2 jours. Donc, juste avant que la marche a commencé, il avait dit, Son Excellence, Monsieur le Président, aujourd'hui, vous êtes président de la République. Donc, si vous gagnez aujourd'hui, vous pouvez faire les choses pour une semaine, parce que vous êtes maintenant président. Il m'avait dit, Akin, je suis président maintenant et je reste toujours économiste. Aujourd'hui, ce sera un seul jour. Je tiens également à féliciter la Confédération africaine de football et tous les États et gouvernements africains pour l'excellent travail accompli et pour leurs équipes respectives. L'un des leçons, Excellence, qu'on ne peut tirer de la victoire de la Côte d'Ivoire dans ce tournoi est la résilience. Les Ivoiriens ont fait face à de nombreux obstacles et défis, mais ils les ont surmontés. Félicitations encore. I'm going to change to English. The same applies to the global environment and Africa as I speak to you today. As we gather today, the world is facing several challenges, especially from global climate change, geopolitical tensions, rising inflation, food insecurity, all layered on rising fiscal challenges and debt of countries. More than ever, we must build resilience. I am pleased and indeed delighted to note that African countries are showing resilience in the face of all of these challenges. Last week, at the African Union Summit, the African Development Bank launched its African Macroeconomic Performance and Outlook Report for 2024. Despite the challenging global and regional economic environment, 15 African countries have posted output expansions of more than 5%. The report shows that Africa is projected to remain the fastest growing region in the world after Asia, exceeding the global average of 3% in 2023. It is forecasted that Africa will account for 11 out of 20 fastest growing economies in the world for 2024, and that's a mark of great resilience of the continent. At your bank, the African Development Bank, all of our work is in support for these countries to build their resilience, whether it be to external economic shocks, climate shocks, or to changes in global interest rates that have continued to put pressure on debt service capacities and depreciation of currencies that's now driving inflation. As an institution, the African Development Bank is very, very resilient. Since we last met physically as one group, I was re-elected as president of the African Development Bank Group by 100% of all the shareholders, African and non-African, a first since the establishment of the bank in 1964. Thank you very much for all of your collective support. The African Development Bank and I, as its president, enjoy and are enormously grateful for the extraordinary support from you, our shareholders. The shareholders of the bank showed their extraordinary support in all aspects of our financing, work, and operations. The shareholders, many of you are here then, collectively agreed right here in Abidjan in November of 2019, just a few months before COVID set in 2020, to a historic increase of the capital of the African Development Bank by 150%, moving it from $93 billion to $208 billion, the largest capital increase in the history of the bank since 1964. I am also pleased, Your Excellencies, to inform you that the 16th replenishment of the African Development Fund, which is the concessionary financing window of the African Development Bank Group, which supports 37 low-income countries, was such a great success. The African Development Fund donor countries, many of them are here today, provided a record $8.9 billion for the 16th replenishment of the fund in December of 2022, and I dare say again, the largest ever replenishment in the history of the fund since its establishment in 1973. Thank you very much. We saw the extraordinary shareholder support again in action when the governors of the African Development Bank Group approved for the African Development Fund to use its equity, which it has accumulated over time, to go to the capital markets to raise more financing. This landmark decision, taken by our governors during the 2023 annual meetings held in beautiful Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, will allow the African Development Fund to raise an additional $27 billion to scale up support for the economic development of the 37 low-income countries. I wish to take this opportunity to thank His Excellency President El-Sisi and the government of the Arab Republic of Egypt for hosting us with incredible hospitality for the 2023 annual meetings. And Your Excellency, Ambassador, kindly transmit to His Excellency President El-Sisi our deepest appreciations. Thank you very much. I would like to use this occasion to give a special thanks. They work behind the scene. They're locked up in committee meetings, in boardrooms all day and all night with their advisors, so you don't get to see them. They don't get to stand up here to give speeches. But I'd like to use the occasion to give a special thanks to all the governors of the bank and the executive directors of the African Development Bank for their incredible support. Our executive directors provide us great oversight with support from their advisors, always to management, to execute the work and programs of the bank, and I would like our executive directors to stand and their advisors to be recognized. Last year, our board of directors approved 159 operations worth $10 billion for the countries, the second highest level of financing in the history of the bank. You can see that result right here in Côte d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, with the construction of the fourth bridge, which you all go over, which was financed by the African Development Bank, so are all the other bridges that you see in the city. Indeed, our support to our host country, Côte d'Ivoire, has increased by more than 5 times, almost 6 times, since 2015, when I was elected president of the bank, rising from $460 million in 2015 to $3.1 billion in 2023. Across Africa, the impact of our high fives has been felt. In the past 7 years, Your Excellencies, the operations of the bank have impacted directly on the lives of 400 million people. In that period, the African Development Bank Group has provided financing for over $44 billion in support of infrastructure, making the bank the largest multilateral financier of infrastructure in Africa. I was delighted to be in the Gambia recently, in fact last month, to see the impressive and historic Senegambia Bridge, which now links Gambia and Senegal, rapidly cutting travel times and expanding trade and the movement of people. The bank will be supporting with $500 million the development of the Lobito Corridor that will link Angola, Zambia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo in close partnership with the United States Development Finance Corporation and the Africa Finance Corporation. I want to thank you, Ambassador of the United States, for all of the great work and facilitation with regard to that. And I know you and I share a different corridor, which is the corridor to link Abidjan to Lagos, for which we've been able to mobilize $15.6 billion to do that. It's very, very important. So thank you, and thank you, everybody, for that. Together, in partnership with Africa 50, the African Development Bank is supporting the construction of the road and rail project to link the Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Je dois vous dire que normalement, quand je passe à RDC ou bien à Brazzaville, si vous faites votre main comme ça, vous pouvez saluer l'autre côté de cette rivière. Mais il n'y a pas aucune liaison. Il n'y a pas le pont, il n'y a pas la route, il n'y a rien. Il n'y a pas le système ferroviaire, rien. Mais je vous dis aujourd'hui, on travaille sans relâche sur ça, avec un montant de $400 millions avec Africa 50 pour réaliser cette infrastructure transformateur. The bank provided 2 months ago $696 million in partial credit guarantees to help unlock $3.9 billion for the construction of the Central Corridor Standard Gauge Railway to connect Tanzania, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Your Excellencies, investing in these and other critical infrastructure is vital to promoting regional integration, connectivity, and intra-regional trade, especially with the African Continental Free Trade Area. Your Excellencies, the Russian war in Ukraine posed significant risks to food insecurity in Africa due to the continent's high dependence on imports of wheat and maize from both countries. The African Development Bank, however, moved swiftly, and its boards of directors approved $1.5 billion for an Africa emergency food production facility to support 20 million farmers to produce 38 million metric tons of food. That is worth $12 billion. When I was asked to testify before the U.S. Senate on this particular issue, I was asked a question, and that question is, how is Africa going to fare? And I remember saying, Ambassador Jessica, that I don't believe that what Africa needs is to have bowls in hand begging for food. That what Africa needs is to have bowls in hand filled with seeds, planting those seeds and being able to feed itself. Because after all, if you are not able to feed yourself, I don't think development can be done with pride. And that's exactly what we are doing. And thanks to that effort and those of others, we've been able to manage the negative externalities and consequences of that. To move beyond the emergency operation and assure long-term food security, the African Development Bank worked very closely with the government of Senegal and President Macky Sall and the African Union to convene what we call the Feed Africa Summit, held in Dakar in January of 2023. The summit, Your Excellencies, brought together 34 heads of state and government, and I must say also with the President of Ireland, who came together with his wife and stayed for 4 days, ministers and leaders from around the world, to map out very clear food and agriculture delivery compacts for African countries to achieve food security within 5 years. Thanks to the effectiveness of the global partnerships used by the African Development Bank, the summit was an outstanding success and was able to raise $72 billion towards the implementation of the outcomes. This is unprecedented in Africa. I am delighted with and thank all of our shareholders, countries, and partners from around the world for putting their hands around together with us to deal with this issue. We have every reason to be confident that Africa can feed itself. Through our initiatives, Technologies for African Agricultural Transformation, which we like to call TAAT or TAT, the bank has supported the access of 12 million farmers to climate-resilient agricultural technologies, including wheat, maize, and rice. Our support to Ethiopia with heat-tolerant wheat varieties has allowed the country to become self-sufficient in wheat in less than 4 years. Thanks to that support, Ethiopia is today a net exporter of wheat. Africa, Your Excellencies, can feed itself. This came to focus again when I had the honor of receiving the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in January of this year, when he visited the African Development Bank's supported work on Rice with Africa Rice, which is one of the global centers working on agriculture. So impressed was he with the work of the bank and our support to food security that he said, and I quote, "The African Development Bank is making the necessary investments in sustainable production in a smart and effective way. I applaud the bank and your leadership for the powerful and inspiring impact of your initiatives. You are setting an example for others about how a bank should be run," end of quote. Let me thank Her Excellency Ambassador Jessica and also our own Executive Director, Alex Severin, and all of their teams for the way in which you are able to help us plan that, for the Secretary of State to be able to see and appreciate our work. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Excellencies, we are tackling head-on the challenge of electricity in Africa. The bank is especially leading on the ramping up of renewable energy. And currently, we devote 87% of all of our financing in energy to renewable energy. Our biggest flagship is called Desert to Power. It's not the desert for food, it's desert commonly like in Sahel and things like that. So Desert to Power, it's a $20 billion program to develop 10,000 megawatts of solar across 11 countries of the Sahelian zone all across Africa. When completed, it will provide electricity for 250 million people, and it will become the largest solar zone in the world. Your Excellencies, to tackle climate change, we are playing our leadership role to support climate resilience for our continent. I'm equally delighted that the donors to the African Development Fund took another bold decision. They opened up a climate action window with $429 million to support these vulnerable countries to build climate resilience in the face of climate change. The African Development Fund is the first multilateral development fund to open a climate window globally among all concessional financing institutions, another show of leadership by the African Development Bank Group. I wish to particularly thank the governments of the United Kingdom, Germany, Switzerland, and Netherlands for their support towards the opening of this critical climate window for the African Development Fund countries. Our goal is to expand the size of this fund to anywhere between $4 billion to $13 billion. The African Development Bank Group and the Global Center on Adaptation are jointly mobilizing $25 billion to implement what we call the African Adaptation Acceleration Program, or AAAP, which is, I must say, Your Excellencies, the largest climate adaptation program in the world. One of the challenges facing many of our countries is the continent is insecurity. If you wake me up and you say, President Adesina, what is that thing that keeps you awake? I will tell you it's insecurity. And that's because 85% of Africans are living in countries either in insecurity or surrounded by countries that are living in insecurity. And in many of the countries, military expenditures now far exceed expenditures on health, education, and social services that we all care for accelerated and inclusive development. That is why the African Development Bank is working on a new instrument. We try to always be very, very creative. And that is called Security Indexed Investment Bonds. They will be used to tackle the intersection between peace, security, and development through the rebuilding of damaged infrastructure in areas of insecurity, rebuilding social infrastructure, and building institutional capacities to manage drivers of insecurity. The Security Index Investment Bonds, Your Excellencies, initiative was approved for development by the African Union heads of state and government. And we are currently working with the African Union Commission to design and implement this important work. Let me turn to the issue of youth. Youth employment and poverty are among the factors that drive insecurity as well as migration that we all see from time to time. The African Development Bank is tackling this issue through its Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy approved by our board of directors. Let me make a few comments here. I certainly do not believe that the future of Africa's youth lies in Europe. It doesn't lie in the United States or Canada, Latin America or Asia or any parts of the world either. Their future must lie in an Africa growing well with inclusive growth and able to deliver quality jobs and livelihoods for its youth. Africa's demographic asset, with 477 million young people below the age of 35, should not become a global externality for others. And that was why when I was in Italy for the Italy-Africa Summit, I met with Prime Minister Meloni. And I said to the Madam Prime Minister, the problems that we see today in Europe with some of our young people is not your problem. That's our problem. We've got to fix it right here on this continent because development has to be done with pride. And I firmly believe that we should have our young people on our continent thriving with their skills, entrepreneurship, but buoyed and supported by financial instruments that are able to turn their ideas into good businesses to thrive on this continent. And that's why for us at the bank, our board approved for us what's called Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy. We set out with a goal to create 25 million jobs and provide skills for 50 million young people. I am delighted that the independent Development Evaluation Department of the bank found that they reviewed the works, that the work of the bank has already helped to create 12 million jobs already, 3 million jobs directly, and 9 million jobs indirectly. The bank, Your Excellency, is also implementing several initiatives to expand economic opportunities and skills enhancement for youths, including technical and vocational training, computer coding for employment, as well as what we call Enable Youth in Agriculture, to develop entrepreneurs in food and agriculture. This program, called Enable Youth, financed with $490 million, has already developed what we call agropreneurs, we call them, 41,000 of them, and created 63,000 direct jobs. And here, let me say, people always ask me, where did your bow tie actually come from? And I said, my bow tie actually came from when I was the Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria. I wanted young people to realize and recognize that agriculture was not a way of life. That agriculture was not something that was meant for poor people. After all, you don't drink oil, you don't smoke gas, but you eat food. And I wanted them to know that the size of that market in Africa will be $1 trillion by 2030. So I needed them to know that agriculture is a business. So I started wearing a bow tie so that I can talk to them. And at some point, people started thinking I was the Minister of Finance, because I actually do think that agriculture is the coolest, most sexy thing that you ever found. And it's going to be the thing that will transform our work. And I want to say that today I'm delighted that across Africa you see young people that are going to agriculture as a business. And that's the way that it should be. Our Coding for Employment program now operates in several countries and is establishing 130 coding centers of excellence across the continent to expand digital skills for our youth. Our financing for women, called Affirmative Finance Action for Women, with the goal of mobilizing $5 billion for women businesses, is showing huge success. By the end of last year, $1.5 billion in loans had been approved for women entrepreneurs. Africa will go further and faster when it gives full support for its women. Women run this continent. Just go to any market and you will find it. And I've never found a bird that flies with one wing. Every bird flies with two wings. So Africa will go faster when it's flying with all the two wings that it has. One of the key areas of our work is to improve the lives and livelihoods of the people of Africa, to address the health infrastructure deficits on the continent. The boards of directors of the African Development Bank approved the bank's strategy for quality health infrastructure. The bank will therefore provide $3 billion to support and finance health infrastructure over the next 10 years. To ensure that Africa can manufacture its own medicines and vaccines, the boards of directors of our bank approved our Pharmaceutical Action Plan. We will provide $3 billion in support of revamping Africa's pharmaceutical industry. Towards this goal, the African Development Bank established what's called the Africa Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation. Just last year, it's based in Kigali, Rwanda. The foundation would help to build manufacturing capacity, negotiate intellectual property rights, on access to proprietary technologies with global pharma companies, innovations, and manufacturing processes. Your Excellencies, I am absolutely delighted to inform you that just a few days ago, in fact 2 days ago, the Africa Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation that I just talked about was profiled by DIVEX as one of the 24 development organizations to watch in 2024. And I want to say that we are delighted with the composition of the leaders to make this work for us. The chair of the Africa Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation Eminent Advisory Council is President Kagame. And the co-chair of that is former Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany. And on it is the DG of WHO, its Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General of WTO, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, myself, Musa Faki, the chairperson of the African Union, and I want to thank the ambassador, EU ambassador here. We signed the financial partnership agreement with you during my visit to Rome, and thank you for all the work that you did to help us in that. It was 3 years in the making. But what I wanted to say is that I was delighted that Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen accepted also to be on the Eminent Advisory Council of the Africa Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation. Thank you very much, and please convey my appreciation to her. We give great value for money to you, our shareholders. With calls for the reform of the global financial institutions, the African Development Bank has been at the forefront of financial innovations. Just a few weeks ago, the bank launched the first ever hybrid capital on the capital market, the first multilateral development bank to do so globally. The $750 million hybrid capital issuance, overscribed at $6 billion, is a landmark globally, so which means we have helped to create a new asset class globally in terms of this. And I want to use that time to ask my Vice President to Finance, Chief Finance Officer, the rest of your team, the Senior Vice President, and all those, the legal counsel, and all the people that made that happen. If you're here, please rise and be recognized. Thank you very much. Thank you. The African Development Bank has also been at the forefront globally on how to better optimize the use of special drawing rights called the SDRs. The framework we developed together with the Inter-American Development Bank for the rechanneling of special drawing rights from SDR-rich countries to African through the African Development Bank is a global game changer. It received resounding global support at the COP28. SDR rechanneling to the African Development Bank will be leveraged by 3 to 4 times. The IMF director is here, and we believe that a $5 billion allocation rechanneling to the African Development Bank will automatically become $20 billion in new financing for African countries. And we are working very closely. Thank my sister for me, Ms. Georgieva. We're working very closely with Ilan at the Inter-American Development Bank and others to make sure we can get this across the finish line. So thank you very much to the IMF and all of our partners on that. We believe that this will make a big difference in Africa and, in fact, to the rest of the world. As I told Kristalina, I said, well, special drawing rights called special drawing rights. And that maybe if we are able to do that, maybe we might even consider adjusting the name and calling it Supporting Development Revitalization. It's still SDR, so it's a different kind of SDR, but it works. So thank you very much. The African Development Bank, Your Excellency, has continued to work closely with the private sector to mobilize greater financing for Africa. The Africa Investment Forum continues to deliver very impressive results, and we are looking to how we can continue to improve it, both as an organization, in terms of its positioning, and in terms of its governance and overall financial sustainability. The 2023 Africa Investment Forum, held in beautiful Marrakesh, Morocco, mobilized investment interest of over $34 billion. I am delighted to let you know that since the bank started the Africa Investment Forum 4 years ago with our partners, it has helped to mobilize a total of $180 billion of investment interest to Africa. I will now close and change to French. En tant qu'actionnaire, vous pouvez être très fier de la Banque africaine de développement. La Banque africaine de développement a été classée meilleure banque multilatérale de développement au monde en 2022 par Global Finance. La Banque africaine de développement a également été classée première institution financière la plus transparente au monde par Publish What You Fund, ou bien on dit publier ce que vous financez. Il y a beaucoup à faire, beaucoup à améliorer, mais aussi beaucoup à célébrer. Cette année marque une étape importante pour la Banque africaine de développement, puisque nous célébrons le 60e anniversaire de sa création. Nous aurions l'occasion de commencer cette célébration dès les assemblées annuelles de la Banque qui se tiendront à Nairobi, au Kenya, en mai 2024, dans quelques mois. 60 ans de partenariat, 60 ans de transformation de l'Afrique, 60 ans à faire la différence pour l'Afrique. Ensemble, continuons à travailler pour l'avenir prometteur de l'Afrique. Avec votre soutien, le groupe de la Banque africaine de développement continuera à susciter l'espoir, à innover, à diriger et à utiliser sa position de première institution financière d'Afrique pour accélérer le développement de l'Afrique. Je sais pouvoir compter sur vous tous. Je vous remercie tous chaleureusement. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming.